He was not pulling at that gate for himself. In the cold blue hour before sunrise, when most of Cedar Hollow, North Carolina, still slept behind drawn curtains and humming furnaces, a German Shepherd K9 stood in the rain, with both front paws braced against a rusted iron gate, tugging at it like something on the other side was running out of time. His coat was soaked dark along the spine, black and tan fur clinging to the shape of lean muscle beneath, and every breath left his muzzle in a pale cloud that vanished almost as soon as it appeared. The gate belonged to the old Whitaker place at the end of Mill Road, a two-story house the neighborhood had learned to ignore. Its white paint had peeled into gray scales. Its mailbox leaned sideways like a tired soldier. Honeysuckle and thorn vines had swallowed the fence until the whole yard looked less abandoned than forgotten on purpose. Staff Sergeant Nathan Cole saw the dog from the cab of his pickup while driving home from the Veterans Outreach Center, where he had spent half the night helping unload donated blankets for families who would never ask for help out loud. Nathan was 36, tall, broad-shouldered, and built with the quiet steadiness of a man who had carried heavy things without complaint. His skin was white, weathered by sun and wind, his close-cut brown hair damp beneath a faded Marine Corps cap. A thin scar crossed the bridge of his nose, not dramatic, just enough to suggest there were stories he did not tell at dinner tables. His eyes were gray-blue, tired but alert, the kind that noticed details before thoughts had names. He slowed the truck when he saw the shepherd lunge at the gate again. Metal scraped metal. The sound cut through the rain with a dry, aching shriek. Nathan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. At first, he thought the dog might be caught. Then the K9 stepped back, looked toward the road, and barked once. Not wild, not angry, precise. A signal. Nathan pulled to the curb, killed the engine, and let the sudden silence settle. Rain tapped the windshield in nervous little fingers. The dog did not run when the door opened. He stayed at the gate, tail stiff, ears high, amber eyes fixed on Nathan as though he had been waiting for this exact truck, this exact man, this exact minute before dawn. "Easy, boy," Nathan said, his voice low enough not to break the morning. The shepherd answered with a whine so thin it barely rose above the rain. Around his neck was a worn leather collar, darkened by water, with an old brass tag hanging from it. Nathan stepped closer, boots crunching over wet gravel and last fall's dead leaves. The tag swung once in the weak light from the street lamp. Ranger. K9 unit. No phone number. No owner's name. Just that. Nathan looked from the tag to the dog's face and felt something old stir in his chest, something between memory and warning. He had known working dogs overseas, dogs who could read a room better than men, dogs who heard danger in the shift of air and grief in a heartbeat. Ranger had that look. Not panic. Purpose. The shepherd turned back to the gate, grabbed a strip of rusted wire with his teeth, and pulled. The latch rattled, but held. Behind it, the yard lay dark beneath wet branches, the house crouching in silence. Nothing moved. Yet Ranger would not stop. Nathan lifted his flashlight and aimed it past the bars. The beam slid over weeds, a cracked bird bath, an overturned plastic chair, and the sagging porch steps. Then Ranger froze. His body went still so fast Nathan felt it before he understood it. The dog's ears tilted forward. From somewhere behind the gate came a sound. Small, faint, almost lost beneath the rain gutter spilling water into an old barrel. Nathan held his breath. There it was again. A soft cry, weak and uneven, like a living thing trying not to disappear. Nathan's expression changed. The tiredness left his eyes. He reached for the gate and tested the latch. Locked. Old, swollen, stubborn with rust. Ranger pressed his shoulder against Nathan's leg, not pushing him away, but urging him closer. "You found something," Nathan whispered. The shepherd looked up at him, rain shining on his whiskers. There was no question in those amber eyes. Only trust and the terrible weight of being unable to open what needed opening. Nathan glanced toward the sleeping houses along Mill Road. Porch lights glowed in a few windows. A curtain shifted across the street, then fell still. People had heard the barking. They were watching now, but nobody came out. Not yet. Maybe they thought it was just a stray making noise. Maybe they were afraid of the old place. Maybe they had spent years learning not to involve themselves in problems behind other people's fences. Nathan understood that kind of silence. He had seen it settle over towns, over families, over men who came home changed and did not know how to ask for mercy. He set his jaw, gripped the wet iron, and pulled. The gate groaned but did not give. Ranger barked again, sharper this time, and the small sound from inside answered with a trembling cry. Nathan stopped breathing for half a second. Whatever was behind that gate was alive, and Ranger knew it. "All right," Nathan murmured, rain running down the side of his face. "We're not walking away." Nathan stepped closer to the gate, the rain soaking through the fabric of his jacket and chilling him to the bone, but he did not flinch. Ranger pressed closer, body taut with anticipation, amber eyes scanning every shadow beyond the rusted bars. The air smelled of wet earth and rotting leaves, mixed with the metallic scent of rain on iron. Nathan could hear the low hum of morning traffic from Mill Road, muffled by the storm, and the occasional drip of water from the eaves above. He noticed the small cry again, a faint, trembling sound, and it sent a chill straight through his spine, sharper than the cold. Each step toward the gate made the gravel crunch beneath his boots, and Ranger's paw movements mirrored his urgency, a synchronized dance of instinct and understanding. Nathan placed his hands firmly on the cold metal, testing the latch, feeling its stiffness under the wet surface. The lock had been neglected for years, swollen with rust, yet it was no match for a combination of Nathan's resolve and Ranger's relentless insistence. As the gate creaked open, a faint shaft of muted light spilled onto the wet yard, illuminating overgrown grass, a tipped-over wheelbarrow, and a line of shadowed hedges swaying in the breeze. The small cry became clearer, and Nathan followed it to the corner of the yard where a young German shepherd pup crouched under an overturned crate, soaked through, shivering, and eyes wide with fear and hope intertwined. Ranger stepped forward, nudging the pup gently with his nose, encouraging it to move, and the pup hesitated for a moment, then slowly inched toward the gate. Nathan knelt down, speaking softly, voice low and even. "It is all right, little one. You are safe now. You do not need to be afraid." The pup flinched at the sound, then paused, studying Nathan's face, and the raindrops caught in its small fur shimmered like tiny sparks. Ranger circled Nathan, positioning himself between the pup and any perceived danger, tail stiff, ears alert, body coiled like a spring ready to act. Nathan extended a hand slowly, palm open, to the pup, who took a tentative step forward, sniffing at it before retreating. He waited, patient, his breath visible in the cool morning air, watching the connection grow, sensing the trust building with every careful movement. The yard seemed suspended in time, the storm fading into a soft drizzle, the clouds parting just enough to let the first pale sunlight filter through, touching the wet leaves and rusty metal with a faint gold glow. Nathan could feel the weight of the moment, the quiet intensity of two dogs and a man sharing a silent understanding, a pact of safety and compassion formed without words. He gently scooped the pup up, holding it close to his chest, feeling its trembling lessen with every beat of his heart. Ranger leaned into him, placing a paw on Nathan's shoulder, eyes still fixed on the shadows, ready for anything, a sentinel of loyalty and courage. Nathan adjusted his jacket to shield the pup from the rain, whispering reassurance, his voice a steady anchor in the damp, quiet world around them. The smell of wet fur and earth mingled with the faint scent of pine from nearby trees, grounding him in the moment, reminding him of his own training, his own experiences with trust, responsibility, and the unspoken bonds between man and dog. The pup nestled into his chest, warmth slowly spreading through its soaked body, and Nathan could feel a sense of relief that went deeper than mere rescue. It was the restoration of hope, the beginning of a new chapter for this small creature and the dog who had guided him here. Ranger stepped back, surveying the yard once more, before sitting down with a quiet authority, tail sweeping the damp ground, eyes locking briefly with Nathan's in a silent acknowledgement of the shared victory. Nathan rose slowly, keeping the pup close, glancing back at the yard that had seemed so menacing just moments before. The storm's rhythm softened into a gentle patter on the leaves, and the morning light grew warmer, illuminating the bond that had just been cemented between human and canine, a testament to patience, attentiveness, and the quiet miracles found in the smallest acts of courage. Every detail, from the rusted gate to the soaked fur, to the hesitant movements of a pup learning trust, was etched in Nathan's mind as he carried the small creature toward the truck, Ranger following closely, guarding, guiding, a silent partner in this act of salvation and fidelity. Nathan carried the small pup carefully through the sodden yard, each step deliberate to avoid slipping on the slick grass and scattered debris. Rainwater pooled around his boots, reflecting the dim glow of the rising sun as the mist began to lift from Cedar Hollow. Ranger moved at his side, paws firm on the wet ground, scanning the perimeter with unwavering vigilance, ears twitching at every distant sound. A crow cawing, the rustle of leaves, the faint creak of an old shutter. The pup nestled against Nathan's chest, its trembling slowing with each heartbeat, and its amber eyes tracked the world with cautious curiosity. Nathan adjusted the hood of his jacket, letting the droplets run down his back, his attention fixed entirely on guiding the two dogs safely to the pickup truck parked at the curb. The truck's bed was empty except for a weathered blanket, damp but serviceable, and a pair of leashes Nathan had brought from the outreach center. He placed the pup gently inside, wrapping it in the blanket, and then stepped back to let Ranger step up after him, watching the canine's movements with a mixture of relief and admiration. Ranger hesitated for only a second, nose lowering to sniff the small pup inside the truck, tail wagging once, then settled comfortably beside it, posture alert but calm, a silent sentinel. Nathan took a moment to breathe, the rhythmic patter of rain fading into a soft whisper as the clouds above began to break, revealing strips of pale blue and warm morning light. The neighborhood, still cloaked in the quiet of early day, seemed to exhale along with him, as though the storm and the tension it carried had passed through and left a gentle peace behind. Nathan climbed into the cab, the leather of the seat damp under his fingers, and started the engine. The hum of the pickup's motor blended with the soft whisper of residual rain on the windshield, creating a steady, grounding sound. Ranger's ears twitched at every vibration, every slight change in motion, and Nathan felt the connection, the unspoken communication forged from countless hours in controlled chaos, trust earned and acknowledged in a glance. He drove slowly down Mill Road, careful to keep the pickup steady over puddles and uneven asphalt, every glance in the rearview mirror showing Ranger and the pup now slightly more relaxed, the small dog nestled closer, seeking the warmth and reassurance Nathan offered without words. The scent of wet pine and damp soil from the surrounding woods reached into the cab, carrying with it the subtle promise of new beginnings and the quiet resilience that comes after hardship. Nathan's mind wandered briefly to the families he had helped the night before, to the small acts of care that built community in ways larger than any single person could measure, and he understood the weight and importance of the moment before him. Ranger's amber eyes met his in the mirror, unwavering, filled with the calm determination of a dog who knew its duty and the gentle protection of one who had seen suffering and still chose care. Nathan smiled faintly, a soft exhale escaping him, and reached out to gently scratch Ranger behind the ears, feeling the warmth of fur pressed against his palm, the subtle vibrations of life and trust. The pup shifted in the blanket, nudging against Ranger, and Nathan could feel the energy of a new bond forming, delicate but undeniable, the small creature learning instinctively that it was safe, that someone had arrived not merely to intervene, but to care. The sun rose further, spilling warm light across rooftops and sidewalks, painting the world in gentle hues of gold and amber. Nathan slowed the pickup near the first bend of Mill Road, glancing at the houses as the neighborhood began to stir, residents emerging to face the day. The dogs remained calm, Ranger vigilant, the pup beginning to lift its head, ears flicking as if testing the air, sensing the world anew through trust. Nathan exhaled slowly, taking in the stillness, the soft hiss of tires over wet asphalt, the faint rustle of awakening trees. He realized that the moment was fragile and perfect, a gift of time and attention, a shared acknowledgement between man and dogs that the morning held promise and safety. Ranger pressed closer to the pup again, eyes scanning the horizon, and Nathan felt a quiet gratitude, the weight of responsibility paired with the lightness of knowing he had arrived in time to offer protection and comfort. Every sense was engaged, the scent of wet grass, the sheen of rain on leaves, the muted chirp of birds, the low hum of the engine. But the focus remained on the bond in the truck, the silent communication between three beings who had come together unexpectedly, yet naturally, under the gray and gold morning sky. A small miracle found in ordinary moments. The first step in a journey that would change the course of all three lives. The road to Cedar Hollow Animal Care curved past a row of sycamores still dripping from the storm, their bare branches reaching over the pavement like hands trying to hold back the morning. Nathan kept the truck under 30 miles per hour, not because the clinic was far, but because every bump made the small pup stir inside the blanket. Ranger stayed in the back seat beside it, one paw stretched across the folded edge, as if the weight of that single paw could keep the whole world from becoming frightening again. The pup had stopped crying, but its silence made Nathan more uneasy than the sound had. He watched it in the mirror, saw the tiny rise and fall beneath the damp wool, saw Ranger lower his nose once, then lift his eyes back to Nathan with that steady look working dogs had when they were waiting for the next right thing. The clinic sat just off Route 17 in a low brick building with a green awning and a sign half lit by the weak morning sun. A woman in blue scrubs was unlocking the front door when Nathan pulled in. She looked up at the soaked Marine, the German Shepherd, and the blanket bundle in his arms, and whatever question had been forming on her face disappeared. "Bring him in," she said. Her name badge read Dr. Emily Harper, and she moved with the quick calm of someone who had learned that panic wasted time. She was in her early 40s, pale-skinned, with auburn hair pinned back in a loose knot and tired hazel eyes that softened when the pup's nose slipped from the blanket. The waiting room smelled of disinfectant, wet fur, and coffee left too long on a warmer. Somewhere behind a door, a dryer hummed. Nathan placed the pup on the steel exam table as carefully as if setting down a newborn. Ranger rose on his hind legs, front paws against the side of the table, not interfering, only watching. Dr. Harper listened to the pup's chest, checked its gums, its paws, its temperature, her expression tightening just enough for Nathan to notice. "He is cold, dehydrated, and scared," she said quietly. "But his heartbeat is stronger than I expected." Nathan let out a breath he had not realized he was holding. "Can you help him?" Dr. Harper looked at Ranger, then at Nathan. "We already are." She wrapped the pup in warm towels from a small cabinet and gave him careful drops of fluid, slow and gentle, never rushing what fear had already made fragile. Ranger did not move from the table. When the pup whimpered, Ranger touched his nose to the pup's ear. When the pup shivered, Ranger leaned close enough for warmth without pressing too hard. Nathan stood beside them with his cap in both hands, rainwater dripping from the brim onto the tile. He had stood in rooms where alarms were louder, where people spoke faster, where every decision felt measured against a clock no one could see. But this quiet room felt heavier in a different way. It asked for patience. It asked for tenderness. It asked a man trained to endure storms to stand still and believe small things could survive them. A few minutes later, the front bell chimed. Nathan turned and saw Mill Road arriving one person at a time. Mrs. Donnelly from the Blue House came first, gray sweater buttoned wrong, umbrella forgotten in her hand. Behind her was Mr. Walsh, the retired mail carrier, still wearing slippers under his raincoat. Then came a young father holding his daughter's hand, both of them looking embarrassed for having watched from their windows and done nothing sooner. Nobody spoke loudly. They gathered near the doorway like people entering church after hearing a hymn from the street. Mrs. Donnelly looked at Ranger and then at the pup on the table. Her voice trembled. Was he behind that old gate? Nathan nodded once. Ranger found him. The name passed through the room softly. Ranger. Not just a dog now. A witness. A messenger. Mr. Walsh rubbed his jaw and looked toward the floor. That house has been empty since old Mr. Whitaker moved into assisted living last winter, he said. We thought the yard was just noise. Cats sometimes. Raccoons. His words faded under the weight of what they all understood. Sometimes neglect does not look like cruelty from a distance. Sometimes it looks like minding your own business. Dr. Harper kept working, but her eyes flicked toward the crowd. He is young, she said. Maybe 8 or 9 weeks. If Ranger had not made somebody listen this morning, he might not have had much longer in that cold. The room fell completely still. Even the dryer behind the wall seemed to quiet. Nathan looked through the clinic window at the pale sun breaking over Cedar Hollow, touching the wet pavement, the mailboxes, The ordinary houses where people were now standing outside in robes and jackets, staring toward the clinic as if the whole neighborhood had been called to account by one dog's faithfulness. Then the pup moved. Just a small motion. A paw slipping from beneath the towel, reaching blindly through warmth and fear. Ranger lowered his head, and the tiny paw came to rest against his muzzle. Dr. Harper smiled through tired eyes. Mrs. Donnelly covered her mouth. The little girl beside her father whispered, "He knows him." Nathan felt something loosen inside his chest. Not victory. Not relief exactly. Something quieter. Grace, maybe. The kind that arrives without thunder, without applause, carried in on wet paws and a cold morning when one loyal creature refuses to let the world stay asleep. Dr. Harper lifted the pup with both hands and settled him into a heated recovery bed near the back of the clinic, where the morning light came through a narrow window and spread across the floor in a thin gold line. Ranger followed as far as the doorway allowed, then stopped when Nathan touched 2 fingers lightly to his collar. The old K9 understood boundaries, but understanding did not make waiting easier. His ears stayed forward. His eyes stayed on the pup. Every few seconds, his nose lifted, reading the air for the small, fragile scent he had carried through the storm. Nathan stood beside him without speaking. The clinic had quieted after the neighbors stepped back into the waiting room, whispering among themselves, calling family members, looking at their shoes as though the tile held answers. Outside, Cedar Hollow was waking in pieces. Car doors closed. A school bus hissed at the corner. Someone started a leaf blower too early and then shut it off, as if even machinery felt too loud for what had happened. Dr. Harper returned with a clipboard, but she did not begin with paperwork. She looked at Nathan first, then at Ranger, and her voice lowered. "There is something else you should see." Nathan felt Ranger stiffen before he did. Dr. Harper led them to a small side table where she had placed the pup's damp towel, the blanket Nathan had used, and a narrow strip of faded blue fabric she had found caught around the pup's hind leg. It was not tight enough to harm him, but it had been there long enough to carry dirt, rain, and the smell of the old yard. A tiny metal charm hung from it, scratched nearly blank. Nathan leaned closer. On one side, under the mud, were 2 letters, R and K. Dr. Harper touched them with the tip of a pen. "It looks like part of a collar or training band. Maybe from the same set as Ranger's tag." Ranger stepped forward and sniffed the charm. Then his whole body changed. The steady working calm gave way to something softer, something wounded and searching. He pressed his nose to the little strip of fabric and let out a sound Nathan had never heard from him before. Not a bark, not a whine, a low, broken breath, almost like remembering. Nathan looked down at the brass tag on Ranger's collar. Ranger, K9 unit. No owner, no phone number. Only a name and a past with missing pages. "You know him," Nathan said quietly. Ranger did not look away from the charm. Dr. Harper folded her arms, thoughtful. Maybe not him. Maybe where he came from. A hush moved through the doorway. Mrs. Donnelly had overheard enough to step closer, one hand resting over her heart. "My husband used to say old Mr. Whitaker trained dogs years ago," she said. "Not professionally, maybe, but folks brought him shepherds sometimes. He worked with veterans, too, before his memory started slipping." Mr. Walsh nodded slowly from behind her. "There were dogs in that yard every summer. Good ones. Disciplined. He used to walk them at dawn." Nathan turned toward the front window, where the old neighborhood road glistened after the rain. The Whitaker house sat only a few blocks away, silent behind its crooked fence, but now it no longer looked empty. It looked like a place holding its breath. Dr. Harper spoke gently. If there was one pup there, there could be records. Food. Something that explains how he ended up behind that gate. Nathan felt the decision form before anyone asked him to make it. He picked up his cap from the counter and settled it back on his damp hair. Ranger moved to his side at once, ready before the command came. "We go back," Nathan said. His voice was calm, but every person in the room heard the weight inside it. The young father near the door straightened. "I will come with you." Mrs. Donnelly nodded. "I still have the spare key Mr. Whitaker gave the block association for emergencies." She looked ashamed when she said it, not because she had the key, but because no one had thought to use it until a dog forced the question open. Nathan did not blame her. Blame was easy. Repair took more courage. They left the pup in Dr. Harper's care, wrapped in warmth, monitored by steady hands and soft machines. Before Nathan stepped away, Ranger refused to move until he was allowed 1 moment near the recovery bed. Dr. Harper opened the small gate, and Ranger approached with almost holy caution. The pup's eyes fluttered half open. He was too weak to lift his head, but his paw shifted beneath the towel. Ranger lowered his muzzle until it rested inches from the pup's nose. They breathed the same air for 3 slow seconds. Then Ranger turned back to Nathan. Ready. Outside, the rain had stopped entirely. The sky over Cedar Hollow had cleared into a pale Carolina blue, and sunlight struck the puddles along the curb until they shone like pieces of broken glass made beautiful. The group walked back toward Mill Road with Ranger leading, not pulling now, but guiding. Nathan stayed close behind, boots steady on the wet sidewalk. Neighbors stepped onto porches as they passed. A woman holding a coffee mug crossed herself without seeming to notice. A little boy pointed at Ranger and whispered to his mother. The old K9 did not look left or right. His nose was forward. His purpose had not ended at the clinic door. When they reached the Whitaker place, the rusted gate stood open from Nathan's earlier effort, trembling slightly in the breeze. In daylight, the yard revealed more than the storm had allowed. Paw prints in the mud, a shallow path worn through tall weeds, and beside the porch, an old wooden doghouse nearly hidden under vines. Ranger stopped at the gate and looked back once. Nathan understood. Some doors open only after mercy knocks hard enough. Nathan and Ranger moved carefully through the yard, the morning sun climbing higher and casting a gentle warmth over the wet grass. Every step Nathan took was measured, boots sinking slightly into soft mud, but he did not rush. Ranger padded beside him with a quiet confidence, amber eyes scanning every corner of the overgrown property. The pup was still at the clinic, wrapped in warmth and slowly beginning to recover, but Nathan could feel its presence through the bond Ranger had shown. They approached the doghouse near the back porch, the wood weathered and damp, the paint peeling in long strips like soft parchment curling at the edges. The air carried the scent of wet pine and soil, interspersed with the faint musk of fur and the lingering rain. Nathan knelt at the edge of the porch, brushing a hand along the damp wooden railing, listening to the soft creak under his fingers. Ranger sniffed at the doghouse, pausing occasionally to lift his head and look toward Nathan as if to confirm the next move. Nathan surveyed the yard. Shallow paths worn through the tall weeds, small depressions in the mud indicating where paws had pressed, and scattered leaves that whispered in the light morning wind. Each detail spoke of neglect, but also of survival. Nathan stood slowly, feeling the cool air settle against his jacket and brushing rainwater from his sleeves. Ranger pressed closer to the doghouse, tail held high, body tense with anticipation. Nathan reached inside, careful, hands steady, and felt the small, rough surface of a forgotten crate tucked beneath the doghouse roof. He pulled it gently into the light, revealing a collection of items, a faded blanket, a small water dish, and a few chewed pieces of wood that had served as toys. The signs of life were subtle but undeniable. Ranger let out a low, satisfied growl, not a sound of anger, but of acknowledgement. Nathan set the crate down and stepped back, letting Ranger examine the space fully. He watched as the dog moved around the doghouse, sniffing each corner, pressing his body against the damp wood, then sitting down with a quiet authority. The neighborhood had begun to stir, and Nathan could hear faint voices drifting from the street. Children laughing as they walked to the bus stop, a neighbor hammering gently on a fence post, someone starting a leaf blower farther down Mill Road. Nathan adjusted his cap against the weak sun, feeling a mix of relief and responsibility pressing gently against his chest. Ranger's ears twitched as a small noise came from the hedges at the edge of the yard, a bird taking flight or perhaps a small critter moving, but he did not flinch. His attention remained on the doghouse, on the space that had held the pup just hours ago, and on the promise that nothing left behind would go unnoticed. Nathan stepped closer to Ranger, resting a hand lightly on his shoulder. The dog leaned into him, a silent communication passing between them. Nathan could feel the steadfastness of Ranger, the patience of a companion who had endured storms and found clarity in small miracles. They paused, absorbing the moment. The sun had climbed further, turning the wet grass to gold, illuminating the yard in a gentle warmth. The air was clean now, carrying the scent of pine and earth, mingled with the faint aroma of damp wood and leaves. Nathan exhaled slowly, letting the tension of the morning ease from his shoulders, while Ranger remained at attention, eyes scanning and body alert, but calm. Every detail mattered: the tilt of the doghouse roof, the scuff marks in the mud, the faint sounds of life returning to the neighborhood. Nathan understood that this space, this morning, and these creatures had combined to create something quiet and unspoken. Trust, resilience, and a small miracle born from attentiveness and care. He felt the weight of the responsibility, the privilege of being present when a bond had to be acknowledged, when guidance and protection were necessary. Ranger nudged the crate gently with his nose, then looked up at Nathan, eyes meeting his in a silent conversation. The day had begun not with urgency or alarm, but with purpose and the certainty that even small acts could reshape the course of lives. Nathan nodded to Ranger, a small affirmation, and together they moved back toward the truck, each step measured, deliberate, aware that the morning held more than just light. It held the first gentle chapter of renewal for the pup, for Ranger, and for the quiet neighborhood that had witnessed, without realizing it, the unfolding of a tiny but profound act of care and loyalty. They were almost at the truck when Ranger stopped. Not slowed. Stopped. His body locked in place beside the open gate, one front paw lifted above the mud, ears angled toward the back porch as if he had heard a voice no one else could hear. Nathan felt the change pass through the leash before he understood it. The neighbors behind him fell quiet. Mrs. Donnelly held the spare key against her chest. Mr. Walsh stood with his hands tucked into the pockets of his raincoat, his face pale beneath the morning light. For a moment, nothing moved except the thin steam rising from the wet boards of the porch. Then Ranger lowered his nose and walked not toward the truck, but toward the old house. Nathan followed. The boards groaned under his boots, but they held. The front door was swollen from months of weather, its brass knob cold and speckled green. Mrs. Donnelly stepped forward with trembling fingers and slid the key into the lock. It resisted at first. Then it turned with a soft click that sounded too loud in the still yard. Nathan opened the door slowly. The smell inside was not frightening, only old. Dust. Closed rooms. Paper. A faint trace of cedar from furniture that had stood too long in silence. Sunlight entered behind them in a narrow blade, cutting across the floorboards and revealing palm marks in the dust, small and large, crossing the entry hall like a message written by feet. Ranger stepped in first, not rushing, not searching wildly, but moving with careful certainty. Nathan let him lead. The house seemed frozen in the middle of an ordinary life. A raincoat hung on a peg. A pair of reading glasses sat on a side table beside a stack of unopened mail. On the wall were photographs in simple wooden frames. Men in marine dress blues. A younger Mr. Whitaker standing beside 3 German shepherds. A group of veterans kneeling in summer grass, while dogs sat proudly beside them. Nathan paused before one photograph. In it, a black and tan shepherd wore a leather collar with a brass tag shaped exactly like Ranger's. The same amber eyes. The same proud head. Younger, maybe, but unmistakable. Nathan looked down. Ranger stood below the photograph, staring up at it in silence. His tail did not move. Mrs. Donnelly covered her mouth. "That is him," she whispered. "That is Ranger." Nathan felt the room tighten around the name. Not a stray. Not a mystery dog passing through. Ranger had belonged here once. Or maybe he had never truly stopped belonging. Dr. Harper's words returned to Nathan. Maybe where he came from. Ranger turned away from the photograph and moved down the hallway. He passed a closed bedroom, an empty kitchen, and a narrow door leading to the back room. There he stopped and gave one quiet bark. Nathan opened the door. The room beyond had been used as a training space. Not formal, not expensive, but cared for. A shelf held old leashes, clean towels, tennis balls in a wire basket, and notebooks stacked by year. A faded Marine Corps flag was folded in a case on the wall. Beside it hung a hand-painted sign with careful blue letters. No one heals alone. Nathan stepped inside, feeling something settle deep in his chest. On the desk lay an open notebook, its pages curled slightly from damp air. Mr. Walsh lifted it gently and read the first line aloud, his voice rough. Ranger returned today after 2 years with the service program. Still remembers every command. Still watches the gate. Ranger stood near the desk, nose lowered. Nathan turned the page carefully. There were notes about veterans who had trained here, dogs matched with men and women who needed steady companionship, puppies born in spring, puppies placed with families, dogs named Grace, Echo, Mercy, and Scout. Then, near the last written page, Nathan found a shakier entry. I keep forgetting things now. Ranger stays close. If I leave, someone please check the kennels. Dogs do not understand why doors stay closed. No one spoke. The sentence sat in the room like a bell after it had rung. Nathan swallowed, then looked toward the window, where the old doghouse could be seen through the vines. The pup had not been random. He was part of a promise someone meant to keep, but no longer could. Ranger pressed his nose against the bottom drawer of the desk. Nathan crouched and opened it. Inside was a small bundle wrapped in a red bandana, tied with a careful knot. He untied it and found brass tags, each engraved with initials, and a Polaroid photograph of a tiny German Shepherd puppy beside Ranger, taken in the same yard before the weeds. Grew high. On the back, in trembling handwriting, were the words, "Ranger knows the last one." Nathan closed his eyes for 1 second. The whole neighborhood had wondered what was behind the gate. Now they knew. It was not only a puppy. It was a forgotten promise. It was an old man's life of quiet service. It was a faithful dog trying to finish a duty love had started. Ranger leaned against Nathan's shoulder, and Nathan rested one hand in the wet fur at the back of his neck. Outside, the first clear sunlight poured through the broken clouds and filled the training room with gold. Nathan leaned back slightly against the edge of the desk, the weight of the morning pressing gently against his shoulders, and watched Ranger settle near the pup's crate, ears forward, eyes scanning for any sign of discomfort. The sunlight through the window had strengthened, pouring across the floor and illuminating dust particles that hung in the air like tiny stars caught in motion. Every sound was heightened. The quiet hum of the heater, the faint drip from a leaky pipe in the corner, the soft shifting of paws on tile. Nathan reached down and rested a hand on Ranger's back, feeling the warmth of fur and muscle beneath, steady, reliable, a pulse of calm that mirrored his own. The pup stirred inside the towel, nudging weakly against the heat pad Dr. Harper had provided. Its eyes blinked slowly, adjusting to light, and Nathan felt a stir of relief, so deep it made him exhale with a softness that seemed to echo across the quiet clinic. Outside, the neighborhood had begun to move more fully. The distant clatter of a trash can lid, a cyclist passing carefully over wet asphalt, the occasional bark from a neighbor's yard. Nathan could feel the connection between the yard, the house, the gate, and the quiet acts of care that had unfolded over the past hours. Ranger's paw lifted, resting lightly on the pup's towel, a protective presence that radiated assurance. Nathan noticed how the small details spoke volumes. The way the pup's ears twitched in response to Ranger, the slight rise of its chest with each slow breath, the faint scent of rain and fur mingling in the warm air of the room. He glanced back toward the training area, now empty except for the neat rows of leashes and towels, and realized that this place, once silent and neglected, had become a sanctuary in a matter of hours. Mrs. Donnelly and Mr. Walsh had stepped to the edge of the room, watching from behind the doorway, quietly absorbing the sight of life being restored. Nathan felt the quiet approval of neighbors who had only just understood the significance of attention and presence. He moved closer to the crate, letting the pup's warmth brush against his forearm as he adjusted the blanket. Ranger's eyes flicked to him briefly, then back to the pup, and Nathan knew the dog understood the morning's lesson. Vigilance and care, patience and gentleness, could change the outcome of the smallest, most fragile life. The pup gave a small whimper, not of fear, but recognition, and Nathan's chest tightened in a familiar way, the way Marines felt when witnessing the first signs of survival against odds that had seemed too great. He knelt beside Ranger, resting a hand lightly on the K9's head, feeling the solid trust that had built between them. Every fiber of the room seemed attuned to that bond. The creak of the floor underfoot, the faint scent of old wood, the distant hum of traffic, all forming a quiet symphony around a moment that was at once ordinary and extraordinary. Nathan allowed himself to breathe fully, feeling the rhythm of the space, the bond between man and dog, and the fragile life they were protecting. Ranger leaned slightly into Nathan's touch, reassuring him that the smallest acts of attention and loyalty had immense power. Dr. Harper moved with quiet efficiency, adjusting a small towel, checking vitals, and leaving space for Nathan and Ranger to observe, her presence both present and unobtrusive. Outside, light continued to fill Cedar Hollow, brushing against the wet roads, the old houses, and the yawning gardens. Nathan could see the reflection of the morning on puddles, glistening like pieces of a larger promise kept. Ranger nudged the pup again, and the tiny creature responded by stretching weakly, pushing its nose toward the comforting presence. Nathan's eyes met Ranger's amber gaze, and for a single moment, the noise of the world beyond the clinic seemed to dissolve. There was only the warmth, the quiet strength of companions who had faced storms together, the gentle assurance that survival and care could ripple outward, touching even those who had been unaware. Nathan whispered softly to Ranger, his voice carrying more gratitude than command, and the K9 responded with a low, satisfied exhale, settling down beside the pup as if claiming the role of guardian fully and completely. The room remained still, filled with sunlight, faint smells of rain and pine, and the deep, quiet promise that the bond forged here would extend far beyond the walls, the gate, the yard, and into every heart that had witnessed, in silence or in awe, the unfolding of a small, undeniable miracle. By late afternoon, Cedar Hollow looked different, though nothing on Mill Road had truly changed. The same mailboxes leaned beside the curb. The same maple branches reached over the sidewalks. The old Whitaker house still stood behind its iron gate, tired and weathered, with vines climbing the fence and rainwater dripping from the porch roof. But people no longer passed it with their eyes turned away. They stood in small groups along the sidewalk, speaking softly, carrying trash bags, work gloves, dog bowls, old blankets, and the kind of awkward kindness that often arrives late, but arrives anyway. Nathan stood near the gate with Ranger at his side, watching Mrs. Donnelly tape a paper sign to the fence that read Community Cleanup Saturday, 10 o'clock in the morning. Mr. Walsh had already called the assisted living home where Mr. Whitaker now lived, and the nurse who answered remembered the old man's dogs, remembered how he still asked about Ranger some evenings when the sun went down. He had not been cruel. He had not meant to forget. Time had simply taken pieces of his world, and the neighborhood had not noticed how many pieces were missing until one faithful dog pulled at a rusted gate hard enough to wake them. Nathan listened as the story moved from porch to porch, not growing louder, only deeper. A veteran named Paul from 2 streets over offered to repair the fence. A teacher from the elementary school said her class could collect towels for the clinic. The young father who had stood ashamed in the waiting room brought a bag of puppy food and placed it by the gate without making a speech. His little daughter knelt near Ranger and held out one small hand. Ranger sniffed her fingers, then lowered his head just enough to let her touch the fur between his ears. She smiled like she had been given a medal. Nathan looked toward Cedar Hollow Animal Care, visible down the road beyond the bend, its green awning catching the sun. Dr. Harper had called an hour earlier. The pup was stable. He had taken warm formula from a syringe, opened both eyes, and tried to crawl toward the sound of Ranger's recording when Nathan played a short video beside the recovery bed. Dr. Harper had laughed softly when she said it, though her voice had carried that careful tremble people get when hope surprises them. "He is stronger than he looks," she had told Nathan. "And stubborn." Nathan had looked down at Ranger and answered, "He learned from the right dog." Now, as evening settled over Cedar Hollow, Nathan walked back to the clinic with Ranger beside him. The sky had cleared to a tender blue, and the last clouds floated west like the storm had finally forgiven the town. The sidewalk smelled of wet leaves and fresh coffee from the diner at the corner. A church bell rang 6 times somewhere beyond the rooftops, each note soft and slow. When they entered the clinic, the waiting room was empty except for Dr. Harper, who stood by the counter with red eyes and a folded towel in her hands. She did not say anything at first. She only opened the recovery room door. Ranger stepped inside, then stopped. The pup was awake. He lay in the heated bed, wrapped in a clean cream towel, his little black and tan face turned toward the doorway. His ears were still too soft to stand, and his body was still thin beneath the towel, but his eyes were open and bright. Amber, like Ranger's. For a moment, the old K9 did not move. Then the pup made a tiny sound, barely more than a breath. Ranger crossed the room with a gentleness that made Nathan's throat tighten. He lowered himself beside the bed until his muzzle rested level with the pup's face. The pup stretched one small paw forward, slow and trembling, and touched Ranger's nose. No one spoke. Dr. Harper turned away, pretending to check the chart. Nathan stood in the doorway with his cap in his hands, feeling the quiet weight of everything that had happened since dawn. The rain, the gate, the cry behind the yard, the notebook, the photograph, the forgotten promise brought back into the light. He had spent years believing rescue meant arriving in time with strength. But this was different. This was rescue by listening, by stopping, by following a dog who knew that love does not end when people forget where they left it. 3 days later, Mr. Whitaker was brought to the clinic in a wheelchair by his nurse. He was smaller than Nathan expected, with white hair, pale skin, and hands folded carefully over a plaid blanket. His eyes wandered at first, unsure of the room, the people, the season. Then Ranger walked in. The old man's face changed. Not all at once. Slowly, like a porch light warming after years in the dark. "Ranger," he whispered. The dog approached and laid his head gently in Mr. Whitaker's lap. The old man's hand found the brass tag at Ranger's collar and closed around it, as if touching home. Then Dr. Harper carried in the pup, now wrapped in a soft blue blanket. Mr. Whitaker looked at him for a long time. A tear slipped down his cheek, quiet and unashamed. "Last one," he said. Nathan knelt beside him. Ranger found him. Mr. Whitaker looked at the dog, then at Nathan, and smiled with a sadness that had finally been given somewhere safe to rest. "Of course he did," he said. "He always finished what I could not." Weeks passed, and the Whitaker place changed. The gate was repaired but left open during the day. The training room was cleaned, the notebooks preserved, the old sign repainted and hung above the porch where everyone could see it. "No one heals alone." Nathan adopted Ranger officially, though anyone in Cedar Hollow would have said Ranger had adopted him first. The pup stayed with them too. They named him Mercy because that was what had found him before the cold could claim the rest of his strength. On quiet mornings, Nathan walked both dogs past the old gate, Ranger steady at his left, Mercy bouncing clumsily at his right. Too small for duty, but already full of purpose. Neighbors waved from porches. Children left bowls of water by the fence. Veterans began visiting the house on Saturdays, not for therapy written on forms, but for coffee, repairs, and the comfort of dogs who understood silence. And sometimes, when the sun rose gold over Mill Road and the town was still half asleep, Ranger would pause by the gate and look through it, as if remembering the morning he refused to let a promise stay buried behind rust and weeds. Nathan never rushed him. He would stand beside the old K9, one hand resting lightly on his back, and listen to the small sounds of the neighborhood waking. Birds in the gutters, tires on damp pavement, Mercy's soft breathing near his boots. Some miracles do not arrive with thunder. Some come as a bark before dawn, a paw against iron, a neighbor opening a door, a tired man choosing not to drive past. And sometimes, God sends grace with wet fur, amber eyes, and enough stubborn love to pull a whole neighborhood back toward the light.